Good evening and welcome to On the Record. I'm Adam Jasser. There is a proud nation in Europe with a long, troubled history of war and ethnic conflict that for much of this century turned it into a pariah state. That country is Serbia, a Slav nation of nearly 7 million people living in the middle of ethnically, culturally and politically divided Western Balkans, the soft underbelly of Europe. The question we will try to answer today is, what is the state of Serbia?
One of Russia's staunchest allies in Europe, Serbia has often been portrayed as a troubled child that cannot make up its mind about where it belongs, the democratic West or the authoritarian East.
Serbia is not only a strategic partner of Russia, Serbia is also an ally of Russia.
But despite such declarations, President Alexander Vučić is making clear that Serbia's future is in the European Union.
There are no both sides. We are on EU path.
Belgrade's position on Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not necessarily always aligned with Moscow. Although President Vučić has ruled out sanctions on Russia, Serbia voted to suspend Moscow's membership in the United Nations Human Rights Council in April 2022. Western media have reported that Belgrade has been delivering hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Serbian ammunition to Ukraine. And this month, President Vučić attended a summit on Balkan leaders with President Zelensky in Dubrovnik, where he signed a declaration voicing support for Ukraine and condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
It is the policy of a free, independent and libertarian country. We support the territorial integrity of Ukraine in accordance with the UN Charter.
It may appear that when it comes to foreign policy, President Vučić would like to have his cake and eat it too. But there's evidence that his goal is to turn Serbia from a regional economic laggard into a flourishing economy capable of attracting foreign investments. Despite recent economic growth, Serbia remains one of the poorest former Yugoslavian nations. One of Serbia's greatest obstacles on the path to EU membership is corruption and the quality of its democratic governance.
To discuss Serbia's place in Europe and its ambitions, I'm joined today by Nebojša Košutić, Serbia's ambassador to Poland.
Good evening.
Engjellushe Morina, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, let me start with you. There's a fundamental question. Where does Serbia belong? The West or the East?
I will answer it very simply. Serbia was the biggest republic of former Yugoslavia with Belgrade as its capital. Former Yugoslavia was the first communist country that concluded one agreement with then European Economic Community back in 1980. It was trade agreement. We were more liberal country as Yugoslavia than many other countries at that time living in Warsaw Pact, including Poland. So my question would be, where does Serbia actually belong? Given the fact that some other republics of former Yugoslavia already joined European Union. There is no other path. So for us then to go towards Europe, and this is a foreign policy goal around which most of Serbian governments and political actors were unanimous over the last decades, especially since 2000.
Okay, fair enough. But the fact is that, as you rightly mentioned, the other former parts of Yugoslavia are now in the EU, and Serbia is still out. And what I find fascinating about Serbia is that it seems to miss the train each time a new wave of enlargement happens. And pardon me for saying this, but sometimes there's appearance, you tend to blame everyone, the conductor, other passengers on the train, and even sometimes the timetable. So why is it happening like this?
You know, there is one very important issue when it comes to Serbia that must be mentioned if you mention trains. A specific thing about Serbia, specific occurrence, was that we have a problem, we were bombed, and we have a problem with our territorial integrity. That's something Ukraine experiencing now. And when it comes to international law, we just seek that it should be applied in the same way in all circumstances and all situations. Our problem with territorial integrity slowed down that progress to some extent. That might be one of the reasons, because, you know, we are fighting for one part of our territory to remain. It's almost 14% of our territory to remain part of Serbia.
Okay, well, we'll go into details of how you want to resolve that conundrum, in a sense. Yeah. But let me ask Ms. Morina now. You know, a lot of Western commentary suggests or implies that Serbia would like to play different powers against one another. So friendly with Russia, friendly with China, friendly with the EU, and now even Ukraine, as we saw in our report. And it seems it's paying off. Foreign investment is pouring in. The quality of life is improving in Serbia. What do you make of it?
You're quite right to point out that there has been this game, as many observers have called it, sitting on the fence or sitting on different chairs. And it is true that this has been the foreign policy of Serbia for the past maybe 12 years, if not more. But I think especially in recent times, I think with the war in Ukraine, with Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and the complex geopolitical situation that we have, that Europe finds itself in, this is now becoming a little bit problematic for European Union that sees Serbia as part of European Union down the line. Not only Serbia, but other regional countries such as Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo, the remaining, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, the remaining 6 countries. But foreign policy stance of Serbia in this respect complicates matters because
how can you explain how?
It's not fully aligning its foreign policy with that of the European Union. And it should, because it's a contractual obligation the minute you sign the SAA agreement. So that is one problem, because for Serbia, it's still important to remain to sustain traditional ties with Russia, because Russia, for one, is a guarantor of the veto power in the UN Security Council with regards to Kosovo. So this is one issue why Serbia will continue to maintain ties with Moscow. But this is quite an obstruction when it comes to what I mentioned earlier on, the aligning of foreign policy with that of European Union. So,
okay, let me now switch. Let me now switch to Mr. Ambassador.
There's also a China problem, but we can come into that later.
Yes, we can come to that later. Mr. Ambassador, you know, when we look at previous waves of enlargement, each time, you know, we saw enormous determination of the countries from Eastern Europe. You mentioned that Poland was, so to speak, behind Yugoslavia in the 80s. But then, once the big change happened and the Iron Curtain fell, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, other countries in Eastern Europe, for them this was the primary objective, join the EU, and they were prepared to do what it takes. My impression is that I never detected that kind of determination in Serbia to really accept the necessary compromises, to really put yourself firmly on that path towards Europe, and we just heard that this relationship with Russia is also part of it.
Yeah, good question. I don't want to dwell on the reasons why we missed that train during the 90s, but I will only say that we all suffered from collapse of Yugoslavia in the beginning of 90s, when you were catching, all of other Eastern European former communist countries were catching that train. And you know, when we finally reached the point in 2000 to start serious negotiations and serious rethinking of our foreign policy and entering this European area of liberty and everything else, we actually missed that fast train that you caught on 2004. But I will share with you one experience I personally had as a young diplomat. I attended German Diplomatic Academy, German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with other colleagues, then younger diplomats from other Eastern European countries, including Poland. It was back in 2002, 2003. We were told at the time that we are candidate. There was famous Thessaloniki summit when we were promised that we are going to enter European Union as a full member country. Then this support for European Union membership was much higher than today, but is not it is not because Serbs, as citizens of Serbia, don't want to belong to EU. Then it is this belief that after almost 20 years, actually more than 20 years, we are still in a position of candidate, and this way we are having with you took so long time that people are disillusioned. So it's not about willingness to enter EU. It's about belief that it will ever happen because of this slowing down the whole process. Also due to enlargement fatigue.
Yeah, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg discussion. Who should really put more effort? So far, and maybe Ms. Morina will correct me, but I think most candidate countries, with the exception from our region, with the exception of Slovakia, really made a very determined push. And because Slovakia wasn't making such a determined push to join the EU, its entry was almost put in jeopardy. So the question to you, Ms. Morina, is there a lesson in this for Serbia?
The Big Bang enlargement of 2004, which is the period that you're referring to, holds a lot of lessons learned for the next wave of enlargement. Here, I would like to agree with the ambassador that the enlargement fatigue is one of the problems that we have, why the region is in the shape that it is today, including the position of Serbia and its foreign policy. So I think if there were to be a serious pull from the EU, after the Thessaloniki Promise in 2003, I think today we would have a different picture in the region. Serbia had some democratic awakening during the government of ex-Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić, but that unfortunately was a very short period. And then the tables were turned in Serbia, and Serbia went through different stages, and now we have what we have. You rightly pointed out at the beginning of your program that there has been a democratic backsliding and so on and so forth. Media is in the very bad shape, and this sitting in the two chairs foreign policy of President Vučić is really not aligning itself with the needs of European Union or what European Union wants to do with the region. But to go back to 2004, Big Bang enlargement, it's really important to look into it and the reasons why this was done in a way that it was done, and to use the same approach mentality to bring the region into the EU as soon as possible.
Right.
So a new strategy.
Good points. Actually, you stole my line, but I'm going to repeat it anyway, which is the question of democratic governance in Serbia. Recent elections, Mr. Ambassador, were contested by the opposition as unfair, a sentiment shared by many, even Serbia-friendly observers. And in the annual Freedom House democracy ranking, Serbia was placed in the second half of the table, which means it's a flawed democracy. And, just like with GDP per capita, which is a good measure of prosperity for a country, this Freedom House democracy ranking, it may have its flaws, but at the end of the day, it indicates something. So, Mr. Ambassador, what is your country going to do about this? To address these concerns, to address these rankings, to improve democratic governance, rule of law, issues which are at the core of European Union values?
We are doing a lot, and actually civil society...
A lot is my favorite quantifier, but maybe we can be specific.
We don't have time. I could give a lecture as a lawyer of what we have been doing over here. We changed constitution, we had referendum. All actors, especially from non-governmental organizations, civil society, were and are involved in various working groups that are working on rule of law, on media law, on all of these indicators you were mentioning. But I don't think that this picture is so bleak. So I think that we are making quite a good progress, especially when it comes to rule of law. When it comes to media in Serbia, you can find various media actors, you can express various positions. Elections, elections are contested very often, not only in Serbia. I can comment now on various elections in various EU countries as well, that not always everything is deemed perfect.
Okay, fair enough. So maybe let's discuss another topic. Ms. Morina, I'll ask you because I don't want to put Mr. Ambassador in a tight spot with this question. So it's your turn. But feel free to comment later if you will. One of the countries that Serbia has developed very close ties in Europe is another ally of Russia, Hungary, and its Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Now, Mr. Orban has been a poster child of a leader who first accepts EU rules and principles only to try to trample on them later. So is Mr. Vucic's choice of a role model in the EU helpful to Serbia's cause in Europe?
So I think I would say upfront that I hope that full Orbanization of Serbia does not happen. There is a danger, of course, that Serbia could definitely go down fully into the path of Hungary. But I hope this does not happen, and I hope the EU pull is much stronger than Orban itself. So for this not to happen, EU has to be very strong with the measures and also maybe accountability when it comes to enlargement accession process. So with Hungary, if we go back to accession process of Hungary, Hungary checked all the boxes on the rule of law and all other chapters, but the minute it went into EU, then things started changing. So EU needs to fix this, not to bring in members that could potentially turn the other way, but EU also has to be very strong in Brussels among the EU member states to be able to use the tools that they have to stop, further urbanization of Hungary. So this is one point. The second point is it's great that Serbia is doing many things to fulfill some of the criteria in some of the chapters, but there is a very important chapter that has to be taken very seriously by both EU and Serbia, and this is chapter 35, neighborly relations. And so here, I think a lot of work needs to be done in Serbia internally in order to respect fully neighborly relations so that the whole region would have peace and stability. So rule of law, of course, is very important, but there are also these other chapters that need to be taken very seriously. Now, there is a lot that EU can do in this respect to bring Serbia closer. One of the things that I would like to suggest, and which is very important, is probably to work more with other elements of the society and not just work with the government. Because, sometimes it's, as we have seen in many cases, governments are willing to tick boxes and pretend that they're doing, as they say, their homework.
Thank you.
There are other elements of the society,
let me interrupt you because
like the opposition.
Let me interrupt you here because you're bringing up a very important point, and I would like to give Mr. Ambassador to respond to this. Mr. Ambassador, we've seen in Hungary that civil society, the media, have come under very strict government control. There is even a sovereignty protection office which can investigate any NGO or any non-governmental organization they don't like, and so on and so forth. This has been widely criticized as a violation. Can you give us a promise here in the studio that this will not happen in Serbia?
I'm not in a position to comment on anything what happens in Hungary because I'm not Serbia's ambassador in Hungary. But I will comment something else. Yes, Hungary is a very friendly country, and when it comes to good neighborly relations, we managed. Hungary is neighbor, but relations between our country, historic ones, were not always perfect.
But please answer my
question. But we
managed.
Mm-hmm. Let me say this. This is very important for public to know. We managed to overcome all historical issues with Hungarians.
True.
So this relationship is not based on role model, rule of law, of I don't know what, but this is historical improvement of relations between Hungary and Serbia.
Point taken, Mr. Ambassador. Let's return to my question.
Yes.
Let me return to my question. Will you adopt similar policies as Hungary when it comes to civil society, to the media?
Once again, I don't want to comment Hungarian policies because I don't know them. I know Polish policies, and I'm trying to interpret Polish policies to my government. That's my job. So, and for that, I'm sure that we are going to uphold all democratic standards when it comes to rule of law, media, and everything else. Whether there will be some mistakes, whether there will be some misgivings by some other international factors or Western factors, NGOs, probably there will be. It's about every country. You have various discussions here in Poland. I don't need to remind you. But I'm sure that our government and our people in Serbia and President Vučić have very good intentions and firm intentions to bring Serbia closer to European Union and to underpin democratic values in it. I'm pretty sure in that.
We take you at your word.
Thank you.
Ms. Morina, any comment on that?
No, I just want to say that there is a lot of work ahead of Serbia and ahead of EU to finalize this relationship because it's really important that Serbia is a stable, democratic, and peace-loving country for the region and for the EU because it's such close proximity to the EU. So I would only add this, that I hope that Serbia is finally deciding that it needs to look towards EU fully and not, continue hedging with its foreign policy, playing with Serbia, playing with China, playing with Iran, playing with Russia. This is really not, it doesn't bode well for the region, but also for the EU as Serbia is, as I said, in a very close proximity. So I think I would, leave it on this note for my last comment. And I thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for joining. And the last question to you, Mr. Ambassador, a historical one. And forgive me if I
like history.
You do, me too. And I apologize if I oversimplify, but I'd like to return for a moment to this relationship with Russia because it's puzzling many people in our part of the world. This alliance with Russia has not always worked to Serbia's advantage. If you look at the First World War, there was a tragedy of expulsion of the Serbian army. Russia couldn't really help much. During the Second World War, Russia was an ally of Serbia and Yugoslavia, but we also know that there were some serious concerns about how the Russian army behaved towards even the partisans who were fighting for freedom then. And, even during the troubles and the war, the ethnic wars that followed the breakup of Yugoslavia, Russia's support for Serbia did not translate into anything tangible, really. And Serbia ended in isolation for at least a decade. So is it time for you to review this relationship?
Partly you offered answer about this perceived alliance when you were talking about First World War and time when Russia ended up in October Revolution. So its role in First World War was ended in 1917, actually, as you know. So what we achieved was achieved actually with Western allies, firstly France and then the United States, if we talk about Versailles Conference. And
so isn't that a lesson for today?
No, it's not about lessons. Russia is a great power, not only one great power. And of course, all states want to have good relations with great powers. I'm talking historically now.
Okay.
And if we talk about today, yes, territorial integrity is one very important issue for us, as it is for Ukraine. That's why Ukraine never recognized Kosovo, like Russia never recognized Kosovo, because it's about territorial integrity, I may tell you that. And when it comes to other things, Russia didn't introduce sanctions to us or did some other things. In that sense, we maintained good relations with it. But to talk about some kind of alliance, I think it's exaggeration. It was historically country with whom we maintained good relations. But to talk that we're looking only towards Russia, I think it's an exaggeration and it's not true, actually. First foreign policy goal for us is membership in European Union. That's one thing you should remember and know.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for this conversation. Ms. Morina, thank you too for being with us.
Thank you to you.
This was On the Record. Thank you for watching and see you next week.